Hello everybody, welcome to episode 205 of Short Fever. Today we'll be going over the Konoha Crush arc of the original Naruto manga. So, I guess I'll kind of just predominantly focus on the fights of this arc, because what this arc predominantly is just fights. Because it starts directly after where we left off, with the Genjutsu being broken after the Chunin exams, and after the Gaara vs Sasuke fight. So there are 4 predominant fights throughout this entire arc. Well, technically 5. But yeah, the 4 major ones are what I'll probably predominantly discuss. So we see as what should we call it? But Hiruzen and the Kazekage are sitting up top, and ultimately we see as the Kazekage ends up taking Hiruzen, putting a kunai to his throat, and ultimately the Kazekage reveals himself to be Orochimaru. So we then see as they start to fight a little bit, but then we see as all of Orochimaru's henchmen and the sand ninja and the sound ninja ultimately end up building a barrier up top. So now Orochimaru and Hiruzen, or the third Hokage, are isolated up top, and nobody can get in, not even the sound ninja or the sand ninja. So we see here as this fight commences. And then also at the same time we see as Kakashi is helping to defend and fight all that, but ultimately he ends up protecting Sakura, which he then gives Sakura the task since she is very good at dispelling Genjutsu. He ultimately says, yo, go break the Genjutsu on Naruto and Shikamaru, and I'll give you Pakun, which is his dog summon, to help you go find Sasuke. Y'all need to go find Sasuke and get him out and make sure he's safe, because that's Orochimaru's goal here. So, we see ultimately she ends up going to break the Genjutsu on Naruto, then they pull up on Shikamaru, and Shikamaru is in fact just faking being asleep. So, yeah, they all end up going and searching for Sasuke. Now, on their way off, they ultimately end up running into some trouble since they're getting trailed by some sound ninjas. So, ultimately, Shikamaru is like, you know what, I'm going to have to sacrifice myself to get him off our tail so y'all can go and find Sasuke. So, we see as he holds back and is able to get the majority of them under his Shadow Paralysis Jutsu. However, there is one left who's there to defend them and block projectiles and stuff like that, which he cannot find. And ultimately, his jutsu ends up breaking because he runs out of chakra. But then we see as Asuma ends up coming in, saving the day and killing all these dudes in a swift swipe. I believe there was 9 dudes there, and he killed all of them very swiftly. But yeah, so we see Shikamaru is saved from that. And then we see as, Sakura and Naruto all end up heading along and continue to go. And so, we see this. And ultimately, they do end up finding Sasuke with the help of Pakun. And after finding Sasuke, we see as they run into Kankuro, Temari, and Gaara and gang, because they're carrying Gaara along because Gaara has been, essentially, he's gone kaput, essentially. So, we see as Kankuro ends up staying behind, he's like, you know what, I'll fight you, Sasuke. But then we see as Shino ends up coming in, Shino Aburame, who is the Beetle Jutsu dude, who I really like. Shino has so much aura in the original series, but it sucks because he kind of lost it later on. But we see as he ultimately ends up fighting Kankuro, and he uses some very intelligent, Shino has an insanely high battle IQ. He uses his beetles in such intuitive ways that he ultimately ends up besting Kankuro, who should be a more powerful ninja than him, considering he has 1 more year of experience, and he's a sand ninja, which has a more harsh environment about it. But yeah, so ultimately we see as Shino does in fact end up beating Kankuro through the use of his beetles, and through using his beetles along the chakra strings that Kankuro makes to essentially break his jutsu down and then beat him. But ultimately, Kankuro is able to dispel some poison gas into the air, which gets into Shino's lungs, but Shino ultimately doesn't end up dying, he's just incapacitated from this. So now Kankuro and Shino are incapacitated. So then we see as ultimately the gang continues along, and here we see as Sasuke ultimately ends up running into Gaara. And with this, Gaara and Sasuke begin their little bout, and through this we also see as Shukaku is starting to break out. He's starting to become more and more free to act as he will within Gaara. And ultimately we see as Gaara starts to sprout different limbs of Shukaku. It starts off with his right arm, then he sprouts a tail, and ultimately Sasuke is using his Chidori, but he is unable to effectively beat Shukaku with this. Now, we do see as the first part of the fight that Sasuke is doing very well, but ultimately Sasuke ends up running out of chakra because he's using both Sharingan and Chidori, which consumes a lot of chakra. So ultimately Sasuke ends up getting defeated here, but ultimately Sakura then ends up, I know I've said ultimately 1,000 times, I apologize, that's one of those words that I just say very frequently. But yeah, so we see as Sasuke ultimately, oh my gosh! We see then as Sasuke is beaten by Gaara, then Sakura and Naruto go and grab him to protect him. And then we see as now Naruto is up to the, oh my gosh, I gotta like that. Naruto is up to the plate to fight Gaara. So now I'm going to focus back on the Hiruzen and Orochimaru fight, since I'll discuss this one to its conclusion before I discuss the other fight between Gaara and Naruto. So the fight between Hiruzen and Orochimaru starts off pretty strong, but ultimately what Orochimaru ends up doing first off is he ends up using the Edo Tensei or Resurrection Jutsu, in which he tries to summon the 3 dead Hokage, but he's unable to get the 4th Hokage up since Hiruzen stops it. And we see as Orochimaru summons Hashirama and Tobirama, and he then ends up inserting his own chakra into their minds, because they speak briefly with Hiruzen about how he's looking and all of that, and just kind of brief chatter. But ultimately, Orochimaru ends up stopping this by inserting his own chakra into them and making them mindless killing machines. And one thing I found really stupid is for Hiruzen to be as good of a combatant as he is, and to have such high battle IQ, the first jutsu he tries to use against Tobirama is Fire Style. Buddy, how did he think that was the best move? Tobirama was like legit his master. He was around Tobirama like his entire life until Tobirama died. But he was around Tobirama this entire time. He knew how much Brody hated Uchiha. He knew that Tobirama was out here creating specific water style jutsu just to combat Uchiha. Why did you use Fire Style, bro? Okay, bro was a little bit of an idiot for that, but this fight is still probably like my second favorite in all of Naruto. But yeah, so we see this, and ultimately Hiruzen is having a bit of a struggle going up against Tobirama and Hashirama at the same time. But he does hold up very well. Like, he is able to hold up far better than I would have expected this old man to be able to. And he just keeps going at it, and we see that he is also struggling this entire time, because he's fighting against his masters and against his most beloved apprentice. Because Orochimaru was like essentially the more evident prodigy among the legendary Sannin, Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Orochimaru, who Hiruzen was the trainer of. He was their mentor. And he keeps flashing back to what Orochimaru looked like originally. We also see as Orochimaru reveals that he has essentially achieved immortality through body swap, and he's only putting up his previous Orochimaru face to mess with Hiruzen's feelings, because he actually has like this soft, round face of a woman now, or a child. But we then see as he ends up swapping back to his original Orochimaru face. And we also get some brief background to what happened when Orochimaru left. I believe it was 10 years ago now. And he left ultimately because he didn't leave because he got shafted for the placement of Hokage, but he did leave because what he ended up doing was he got caught with his experimentation on human trying to learn new jutsu and acquire immortality and stuff like that. And Hiruzen came, confronted him, and he could have killed him there, but ultimately he let Orochimaru off the line. And so that's kind of what happened, and we see that Hiruzen still does have a love for Orochimaru as his student, because he's like, he knew Orochimaru in his innocence. That's all he's seeing. And we get to see, as previously in the banter that Tobirama, Hashirama, and Hiruzen had, is the downfall of Hiruzen. Hiruzen views everyone in the village of Konoha as his family, as people who are dear to him and special to him. And this is, I believe, the reason why Hiruzen didn't make for the greatest of Hokage policy-wise. Because we see as he doesn't want to criminalize anyone within his own village. For example, Danzo was out there doing horrible crap, but Danzo was his friend. Danzo was his family. So therefore, he wouldn't criminalize Danzo. He wouldn't look deeper into and see that Danzo was quite the monster, even though he was doing it for the good of the village. So Hiruzen is just unwilling to really, I guess, notice the deceit and the idea that those closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the easiest. So I think that's one of the reasons why Hiruzen is seen as one of the lesser Hokage. But I mean, he also is just a good dude. Like he is, I don't really know how to phrase. I guess it's kind of like a situation, like a Jimmy Carter situation, where they're a good person, bad leader, because of how they view things. But yeah, so with this, like we see as they keep fighting, and ultimately what Hiruzen has to end up doing, because he gets blinded by a jutsu at one point, so he has to pull out all the stops. He pulls out the Reaper Death Seal jutsu, which was what the 4th Hokage, or I'm just going to say Minato, because that's what his name is. We see as he ends up pulling out this jutsu, which Minato used to seal Kurama within Naruto, and we see as he pulls this out, and ultimately is able to seal both Tobirama and Hashirama with the Reaper Death Seal, so that they do not remain, their souls do not remain within these husks that have been created for them. And this ultimately leads to them transforming back to their previous forms, in which how Edo Tensei works is that ash is covered on a body and it ends up making an outward visage of the person whose soul possesses this body, but ultimately it's just some random people. And they were random people that Orochimaru had killed. So we then see as Orochimaru is trying to kill Hiruzen a little bit more. He ends up pulling out a sword, but he gets close enough to where Hiruzen can grab him and try and attempt to Reaper Death Seal on him as well. Now, ultimately, Hiruzen is unable to pull out all of Orochimaru's soul because he doesn't have enough stamina or chakra left for it. So he's able to only pull out Orochimaru's hands, and this ultimately ends up debilitating Orochimaru's hands, so he can no longer perform ninjutsu, which was his essentially main goal. And this leaves Orochimaru horribly scarred and horribly defeated, even though he did not ultimately end up dying. Which is a great tragedy for Hiruzen, but a massive victory on his part, because Orochimaru can now not perform ninjutsu until a little bit later on. But yeah. So with this, I gotta go back to focus on the Naruto vs. Gaara fight. Now, the Naruto vs. Gaara fight, it goes pretty poorly for Naruto for the beginning, because the only thing he really pulled out is Shadow Cloning Jutsu, which he ultimately does end up getting a brief upper hand on Gaara by giving the 1,000 Years of Death with a kunai to the posterior of, I think posterior is right, yeah, posterior is the back part, I believe. My health science is failing me at the moment, but yeah. So, we see as he ends up getting the 1,000 Years of Death on Shukaku beneath the tail, which is a weak spot. However, this ultimately does not end up working, and we see that Shukaku ultimately is able to take full power of Gaara and transform into his one-tailed beast massive form. And Naruto's like, oh, well, crap, I guess I gotta try and summon Gamabunta. So at first he did try and summon Gamabunta, but he summoned Gamakichi, which is Gamabunta's son, and then after Shukaku ultimately ends up coming out, Gamakichi is like, okay, yeah, you probably need to summon my dad. So, well, he doesn't tell him this at first. But we see as Naruto is able to summon Gamabunta, and he's able to convince him to help him because Gamakichi's like, that dude was being mean to me, and Gamakichi is Gamabunta's son. So we then see these two colossus begin to fight. Great fight, by the way. I love this fight. And we see as Gamabunta and Shukaku ultimately end up going against each other. And it's going pretty well for Gamabunta at first, but then he starts to kind of fatigue a little bit because him and Naruto start to run out of chakra. However, what Naruto is able to do is they are able to conjure up something because at one point Shukaku gets him pretty close, but Gamabunta doesn't really have any teeth or claws to scratch at Shukaku with in this position. So ultimately they end up forming like a visage of Kurama, which then allows him to break from this grappling stance. And this goes on for a little bit longer, but ultimately nothing ends up working too well. But we do see as once everything seems to be in favor of Shukaku and out of favor for Gamabunta and Naruto is able to tap into the Nine-Tailed Chakra and goes at Gaara and is able to break the control that Shukaku has. They both end up landing on the ground with barely no chakra left to them and only one punch left in their system. So they both end up pulling out this one punch and everything ends there. So we also do get throughout this the backstory of Gaara. We learn that Gaara was the son of the Kazekage, which we knew. And we learned that he had an uncle by the name of Yashimaru who had kind of been like his protector since the Kazekage was very busy throughout his childhood, but ultimately Yashimaru was tasked with killing Gaara because Gaara had become too volatile of an asset. And we see then as they kind of discuss it, and ultimately Yashimaru ends up revealing to Gaara that he in fact kind of despised him because his sister ended up dying due to Gaara, and how Gaara was never supposed to be born because his sister never wanted to have Gaara. But we see also as he mentions about how Shukaku being embedded in Gaara is an everlasting testimony to the hate that his sister felt toward the world and toward the Sand Village and all of that. So this is kind of how Gaara became the person he is today, because the person who was supposedly the one who taught him what love is and what it means to feel has now betrayed him and broken him as an individual. And we see that he absolutely kind of falls in on himself and decides to only live for himself and only to destroy, because that's what his mother essentially instilled in him at birth. But after this fight, we see as Naruto is able to persuade Gaara into the idea that, you're not alone. You're not the only person who feels like this. And the reason why you need to love and the reason why you need a reason to fight, and that reason to fight needs to be people that you can protect. You need to fight to protect people rather than just for fighting. And you need to protect the people you love, because in doing this, then more people will love you. And then if you are loved, then you will have more of a purpose to fight, and you won't just be fighting to kill. And ultimately, Gaara ends up taking up on this. We see is he apologizes to Temari and Kankuro after they come and save him. Also, Sasuke comes and gets Naruto, and also Sakura throughout this entire thing had been stuck in a sand coffin. That's why Naruto was compelled to fight and not just run away, because he had planned on running away, but ultimately Sakura got caught in a sand coffin, and he had to fight then. But ultimately, she ended up getting released, and everything was fine. And that's really where this arc kind of ends. We do see as we actually get to see the funeral of Hiruzen and all of that. Everyone's crying, boohoo, and Konohamaru is obviously very broken down. And we see also as people, as Naruto discusses with Iruka about why people fight for, or what they fight for and why they fight, even if they know they'll die and stuff like that. And we then see as the elders of the village go to Jiraiya to try and convince him to be the Hokage, but ultimately Jiraiya's like, I am not being Hokage, buddy. And he's like, you know what? If you need one of the 3 Sannin to go do it, then I'm going to go find Tsunade. And that starts off for the next arc, which is Search for Tsunade. So yeah, this arc, I loved it. This arc is my second favorite, still my second favorite in all of Naruto. Like, my rankings really haven't changed. Now, the villain, I do feel as if Orochimaru, I feel like the best villain still so far has been Zabuza, which with the Land of Waves. However, I do really like Orochimaru as a villain, but I find him to be less compelling, as he's legit just like straight up pure evil, and Zabuza had more of that human nature to him. And we do see that Orochimaru does shed tears for Hiruzen throughout the fight, but I mean, he's just kind of wanting to kill Hiruzen. He's not really feeling too much emotion, even though he is slightly feeling emotion. I just feel less of a human connection to Orochimaru than I do for Zabuza. So yeah, I feel as if overall Konoha Crush has more interesting fights, but Zabuza is still probably the best antagonist in all of the original Naruto manga, at least individual antagonist. But yeah, so that's all there really was for the Konoha Crush arc. And yeah, obviously I'll be getting the Search for Tsunade arc to you pretty soon. I only got 11 volumes left in my big old collection over there, so I can't wait to blast through those and get you some review videos on them. So yeah, that's all really, like I said, that's all there is for the Konoha Crush arc, and that's all I really have for episode 205 of Show for Review. So thank you very much for watching.